This was during the last few years of living at home with my parents. Our house sat on 15 acres of dense woodland, 40 minutes from the nearest neighbor. My parents had bought it a while back because they didn't like being too close to neighbors. I was 19, home from college for winter break, when my parents announced their last-minute trip to visit my grandmother in Arizona. They'd be gone for 5 days. I volunteered to stay behind and watch the house, figuring I could chill out at home and play video games. And the first 3 nights passed without incident. It was exactly how I had planned it out to be. But on the 4th night, something changed. I was in the kitchen around 9 o'clock, cleaning up after dinner, when I heard footsteps on the gravel driveway. I waited before moving to the front window, peering through the curtains into the darkness. The motion sensor light above the garage should have activated if someone had approached, but the driveway remained dark. I convinced myself it must have been a deer or maybe some other animal wandering through the property. 20 minutes later, I was settling into the living room when I heard it again. This time, the footsteps circled around to the back of the house. My heart rate quickened as I realized the sound was too heavy to be an animal. It had to be a human. I grabbed my phone and moved quietly to the back door, pressing my ear against the wood. The footsteps had stopped again, but I could sense a presence just outside. I called out, asking if anyone was there. No response. After 10 minutes of silence, I began to doubt what I'd heard. Maybe the isolation was getting to me, making me paranoid. I decided to turn on all the exterior lights and do a quick walk around the property. The floodlights illuminated the entire yard, casting harsh shadows against the tree line. I circled the house twice, checking windows and doors, looking for any sign of disturbance. Everything appeared normal. Back inside, I locked every door and window, something I'd never bothered to do before. Around midnight, I was still hanging around in the living room when I heard a metallic-sounding noise. I got up and went to see where it was coming from. That's when I realized that I was someone testing the front door handle. I froze in my stance, watching the door handle move up and down. Luckily, I had locked the door, so there was no way the door would open. After a moment of silence, a knocking sound followed. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering my address and explaining that someone was trying to break into my house. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but warned it might take a while given the remote location. The knocking moved to the back door, then to the side windows. Whoever was out there was either checking every possible entry point or just trying to freak me out. I found myself crouched behind the kitchen island, phone clutched in my hand, trying to track the movement around the house by sound alone. The person outside seemed to know exactly where I was, because the tapping always came from the side of the house closest to my position. At one point, I heard the distinct sound of someone trying to pry open the basement window. The old wood frame groaned under pressure, and I realized with growing horror that they might actually succeed in getting inside. I called the police again, pleading with them to hurry. The basement window finally gave way with a sharp crack of splintering wood. I could hear movement below me now. Footsteps on the concrete floor. Someone moving through the basement storage area. They were inside my house, and I was trapped on the main floor with nowhere to run. I barricaded myself in the upstairs bathroom, pushing a heavy dresser against the door. The old house's wooden floors creaked with every movement, so I could track the intruders' progress as they made their way up from the basement to the main floor. The footsteps moved through the kitchen, then the living room, then stopped at the bottom of the stairs. For several minutes, there was complete silence. I held my breath, pressing my ear against the bathroom door. Then I heard the steps coming up the stairs. The person wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. Just as the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, I heard the sound of a police siren outside. I heard car doors slamming, officers shouting commands, and the sudden sound of someone running back down the stairs and down to the basement. I stayed in the bathroom until the officers cleared the house and told me it was safe to come out. I told them everything I had experienced, but of course the person was nowhere to be found. Interestingly enough, nothing had been stolen either. The basement window showed clear signs of forced entry, and there were muddy footprints throughout the lower level, but the person had vanished into the woods without a trace. I spent the remaining night at a hotel in town, and when my parents returned the next day, they were absolutely shocked to hear what happened. My dad immediately started installing a new camera system, and we got new locks too. To this day, I still can't explain what the intention of this person was. It must either have been a planned robbery, but they didn't find anything valuable enough. Or, and this would be far more disturbing, they knew that I was home alone that night. Perhaps I was the target, but they failed to get to me in time. I don't know if I will ever get rid of the paranoia that this experience left me with. I'm just glad the police got there in time. This happened a while ago. I'd moved into a small house just outside of town. It was just a small 2-bedroom house, nothing fancy at all. That night, I'd ordered Chinese food at around 9 o'clock. I was planning to just chill out that night, catch up on some video games, and binge watch a new season on Netflix. I got comfy on the couch, cracked open a beer, and started watching the first episode. After an hour had passed without any sign of my food, I checked the delivery app on my phone, expecting to see something about a delay. Instead, the screen showed that my order had been delivered 20 minutes ago. The driver had even included a photo, a blurry image of what looked like food containers sitting on a porch. I walked to the front door and peered outside, but the small concrete step was empty. I called the restaurant and inquired about the situation. The manager apologized profusely, explaining that their driver had insisted he'd delivered to the correct address. He offered to send a replacement order, but warned it might take another hour given how busy they were. I declined, figuring I'd just make something at home. As I hung up the phone, something caught my eye. The security light on the back patio had triggered, casting a harsh white glow across the small yard. I watched through the kitchen window as the light stayed on for its full 5-minute cycle, suggesting something large enough to activate the motion sensor was moving around out there. 20 minutes later, I was microwaving leftover pasta when I heard what sounded like my car door slamming shut. I froze, listening carefully. My Toyota was parked in the driveway, about 30 feet from the house, and I was certain I'd locked it when I got home from work. I moved to the living room window that faced the driveway, staying back from the glass so I wouldn't be visible from outside. My car looked undisturbed, sitting exactly where I'd left it. But as I watched, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The interior light was on, which switches on when the doors are opened. I grabbed my keys from the kitchen counter and clicked the lock button on the remote. The car's lights flashed once, and the interior light went out. Someone had definitely been in my car. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe I'd forgotten to lock it properly, and some kid was looking for loose change or something to steal. It happened in this neighborhood occasionally. I decided to call the police to report the car break-in, but when I reached for my phone, I realized I'd left it on the kitchen counter. As I walked back to get it, I noticed the back patio light had triggered again. But this time, I saw what had set it off. A figure, definitely a man, stood at the edge of the light's reach, just barely visible in the shadows near the fence line. He was facing the house, completely motionless. I ducked below the window level, heart pounding. When I gathered the courage to look again 30 seconds later, the figure was gone. Freaked out, I turned off all the lights in the house and moved carefully from window to window, trying to spot whoever had been outside. But I didn't see anyone. Around midnight, I heard a soft scraping sound coming from the side of the house. I went into the room where I could hear the sound the loudest and pressed my ear against the wall. Before I could actually make out anything, I heard a tapping coming from the nearby window. I realized with growing horror that whoever it was checking to see if the window was latched properly. The tapping moved to the corner of the window where the latch was located. I heard the distinct sound of someone trying to lift the window frame. Thank God I developed the habit of checking all the window locks before bed each night. I grabbed my phone and finally dialed 911, whispering my address and explaining that someone was trying to break into my house. The tapping stopped abruptly, as if the person outside had heard me talking. I held my breath, waiting for some indication of where they'd gone. Instead, I heard my front doorbell ring. The sound made me jump so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. I crept to the front of the house and peered through the peephole. A man stood on my porch, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. He was clean cut, maybe in his 30s, wearing jeans and a baseball cap. It looked like it could have been the guy I had seen earlier, but I couldn't tell for sure. He rang the doorbell again, then called out that he had a delivery for me. He said that he tried to drop off my food earlier, but no one had answered. I knew that he was lying, because no one had rang the bell earlier. I stayed silent, hoping he'd give up and leave. Instead, he began knocking on the door. The knocking continued for a few minutes before stopping. I approached the peephole carefully. The porch was empty. When the police arrived, they saw that someone had tried to pry open the kitchen window using what looked like a screwdriver. There were fresh scratches in the paint around the window frame and small wood shavings on the ground below. The officers took a report and increased patrols in the neighborhood for the next few weeks, but they never found anyone who matched my descriptions. To this day, this story creeps me out. I still don't know if that man actually worked as a food delivery guy, and if it was him who uploaded the blurry photo of my delivered food. Luckily, he never came back since that night. This happened back in 2017. As a female in my 20s, I was living alone in a city apartment. My place was on the 4th floor, with large windows facing the street. I'd always loved the natural light and the view of the busy sidewalk below. At one stage, the building across the street started getting renovated. The construction noise was brutal during the day, but I worked night shifts at the hospital, so I usually slept right through it. One evening, when I was getting ready for work, I was putting on my scrubs when I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I looked over, and there was a man standing on the scaffolding of the building being renovated across the street, on the same level as my bedroom window, not more than 60 feet away. I couldn't see him clearly, but he was definitely facing my direction. He appeared to be doing some kind of work, holding what looked like tools. So even though it was kind of weird to be working construction at that hour, I didn't think too much of it. When I got home the next morning, I was exhausted from the night at the hospital. I'd barely kicked off my shoes and gotten undressed when I walked into the bedroom and noticed the same figure standing on the scaffolding. This time, there was no mistaking his focus. He was definitely looking directly at my apartment, potentially seeing me half undressed. I immediately moved away from the window and watched him from the side, hidden behind the curtain. The man just stood there completely motionless, before finally disappearing into the building's interior. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Every time I came home from work, he was there, looking directly towards me. One time, I even opened the window and waved at him, trying to get him to realize that he was creeping me out. But even then, I got no reaction from him. Most people, if they realized they were being watched, would look away instantly or show some kind of reaction. But this guy just stood there like a statue, and it really made me feel uneasy. I mentioned it to my neighbor, who lived in the apartment next door. She was retired and spent most of her time at home, so I figured she might have noticed something unusual. She told me she'd been keeping her curtains closed for the past week because she felt like someone was watching her apartment too, but she'd assumed it was just her imagination, since she was an elderly woman living alone and sometimes felt paranoid about her security. I started trying to get a closer look at the guy. I took photos of him on the scaffolding, but the distance was a bit too much for my old iPhone, and I had no chance of getting a clear shot of his face. A few days later, I was coming home from an early shift around midnight when I noticed the man, not standing up on the scaffolding, but instead on the sidewalk, directly in front of my building. I sneaked into the lobby before he could see me and watched through the glass doors. He stood there without any motion for another brief moment, then slowly started walking around the building. I wondered if he was checking for fire escapes or something that might give access to our level, but I couldn't be sure of that. My heart was pounding as I waited in the lobby, afraid to go up to my apartment while he was still outside. Eventually, he disappeared around the corner, and I quickly took the elevator to my floor. The next morning, I found a note that had slipped under my door. It was handwritten on plain paper. It was from a man claiming to know me very well from the opposite building and wanted to take me on a date. He said that he knew my routine was unusual due to my nature of work, but he could make it work. My heart almost dropped when I figured out that the man had somehow found access to the 4th floor and had been standing just outside my door. That evening, I was debating whether to stay at a friend's place when I heard a soft knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man standing in the hallway. He was wearing a construction vest and hard hat, holding a clipboard. There was no doubt in my mind that this was the guy. He knocked again and called out that he was from the construction company and needed to discuss some noise complaints. I told him that he must have the wrong apartment and that I won't be opening the door. He should take it up with our building manager, should there be any problem. Luckily, the building manager had given me his direct number for emergencies, and I called him immediately. He lived in the building's basement unit and was upstairs within minutes, but by the time he arrived, the man was gone. But the building's recently newly installed security camera had captured clear footage of him in the hallway. The manager called the police and sent them the footage. They identified the man as someone who'd been trespassing on several construction sites in the area. He wasn't actually employed by any of the companies and had been using fake credentials to access buildings under renovation. It turned out he'd been targeting buildings with clear sightlines to residential units, using the construction access to observe potential victims and learn their routines. The police found evidence in his apartment that he'd been stalking at least 6 different women across the city. He was eventually charged with trespassing, and I filed a restraining order against him. Luckily, I never ever saw him again, but this experience has changed the way I move around in my apartments, and nowadays I always keep my curtains closed as well. I also moved out a few months later, as I never felt completely safe in that apartment again.